Good evening. Welcome to our 6 o'clock Bible Challenge. And this evening we're going to discuss, especially right at this time, a very touchy subject. And I've said many times that the Bible has got something to say about everything. And he does. And we're going to look at Ephesians chapter number 6, just a few verses, but these verses deal with slavery. And you might say, whoa, wow, what does the Bible have to say about slavery? This is the Apostle Paul speaking to the Christians that are in Ephesus. And this may surprise you. I'm not saying slavery is right, okay? I'm just telling you what happened during history and how people lived and what was the accepted thing and how people dealt with it and how they tried to live and get along. And so in that area, it was estimated during the time that Paul was writing that 1/3 of the population at Ephesus were slaves, were indentured servants. That means that they had in a sense given up their right to freedom and be a free person, and they were working off a debt, something their parents owed. And they worked for so many years, and most of the time at the age of 30, the indentured servant was granted his freedom. But in a lot of these cases, instead of taking advantage of their freedom, they had been treated well, so much so by that family, by that person that was their master in a sense, that they chose to stay there. And before you lose your mind, just listen to what Paul says to the servants and the master, what they're to keep in mind. Starting in verse number 5 of Ephesians 6, it says, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh." Those that are in charge, be obedient. "With fear and trembling, in singleness of your heart, as unto Christ." And so Paul is speaking to Christians, believers in Jesus Christ that are servants or slaves, indentured servants. And they have a master. And so Paul is encouraging them to have the right attitude, to realize they're really serving God. They are a servant of Jesus Christ. And so it says, not with eye service. That means not just when you're being watched, but all the time. We could all apply that to our lives. How do we behave when no one is around? When we think no one's watching? How do we behave then? Not with eye service, as men pleasers. See, we want to, as long as we know we're being watched, okay, I want to do the right thing and make the boss happy. I want to please him. You can just be working a 9-to-5 job or a 7-to-3 job in a factory somewhere, and you can begin to be working as an eye service, saying, well, as long as the boss is standing over there, I better work hard. But when he's not, I'm going to be lazy and cut up and just do as little work as possible. And Paul is explaining that's not right. That's not how you work. But instead, the back half of 6 says, "But as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart." So Paul is saying, whatever your lot, wherever you find yourself in your life, serve the Lord with the right attitude. I'm reminded of the story in the Old Testament of Joseph, where he was sold by his brothers into slavery. And the whole time he was a slave, he had the right attitude, and God was with him. And in the end, God blessed him in a miraculously huge way. Let's read on. It says in verse 7, "With good will doing service as to the Lord and not to men." If you have a problem with your boss at where you work, instead of focusing on your boss, do your job and say, "I'm doing this for you, God." It'll help your attitude. And it says in the next verse, "Knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free." And so Paul says, I want you to realize, whether you are a slave, an indentured servant, or you're a free person, whatever you choose to do in your life as far as working, God is watching, and if you do the right thing, Paul says, God will bless that. And so listen again, it says, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. And then Paul touches on the masters, those, the boss, or the master, those in charge. And he says, and ye masters, do the same things unto them. Forbearing, threatening, that means do away with your verbal abuse. Don't be yelling and screaming and threatening your workers, your slaves in this era. Don't behave like that. Knowing that your master also is in heaven. Neither is there respect of persons with him. And so Paul challenges those that are in charge, the master or the boss, behave wisely. Because you have a boss too. Your boss is God. And he's watching how you treat the others. You know, we sometimes we think, well, it doesn't matter how I behave on the job, and maybe you work somewhere and you walk out of there and you steal paper clips. That's still stealing. Maybe you take screws and nuts and bolts and things like that from the factory where you work. You put them in your lunchbox, and every day you just take a handful of those home. You've got jars in your workshop where you've got all kinds of stuff that you've stolen over the years. Really, do you realize that that's wrong? That you have all this stuff in front of you that displays that you're a thief. Paul says, just do the right thing wherever you're at, not with eye service. Don't just try to put on the right behavior when you know you're being watched. Do it all the time, even when you're alone. That means you don't mutter and mumble and groan and even cuss under your breath when no one else is around. You're out working in the field and nothing goes right when you're making hay, or you're in the workshop working on things, and it doesn't matter. God is watching, and he's our boss. And he rewards right behavior. So you see, God does have something to say about everything. Have a blessed evening.